to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about 10 things that reptiles absolutely hate. And I think I've done this video before, but it's a good refresher and I possibly may have added new things. So yeah, we're going to jump right into it. This may help your reptiles become more trusting of you if you become aware of the things that they hate, so that way you can avoid it, especially if you're trying to build that trust with a reptile. This stuff is very important. So the number one thing that reptiles absolutely hate, which I feel like is pretty obvious, is phones. And some people may not realize it, I mean, myself included. When you're keeping reptiles, you obviously want to be taking pictures of them because they're such cool animals and you want to be able to share it with others and show them your amazing animals. And I mean, any animal that you have as a pet that you love, even a dog or a cat, like, you know, you're taking pictures of them 24/7. So it's going to be the same thing with your reptiles as well. However, reptiles typically can get very fearful of cameras and devices in front of them because they just aren't sure what they are, especially if you are going over the top of their head. A lot of them get very stressed out and they think that it may be a predator above them. So if you are taking pictures, I would recommend trying to avoid using flash because flash also freaks them out. Janemba, even last week, I had Janemba out and I had my boyfriend try to take a picture of Janemba while he was out, and the flash went off and Janemba like tried to jump out of my hands. He was so fearful and didn't know what was going on. So that's something that you should definitely try to avoid. It's also difficult because if you're trying to take videos or pictures of them at nighttime, it's very dark and sometimes you need the flash in order to get a picture of them. So if you can avoid it, I would recommend it. They don't really like it, and that's something that can stress them out. Some animals may actually be curious and they aren't as fearful of cameras. They may go near it, while others will avoid it and don't like it at all. So it's just something to be aware of, and pay attention to your reptile's body language. If it is fearful of your camera, I'm sure you'll pick up on it right away and realize that maybe that's something that you should avoid doing, or do it more from a distance and don't be sticking the phone like right in front of their face. Number 2 is lack of hides. So hides are the one thing that reptiles absolutely love because it makes them feel safe and secure in their environment. And when they don't have that, they can feel trapped. Especially, like, that's the main argument when people say that you shouldn't give your reptile a large enclosure. They say that you shouldn't do that because your animal's going to feel stressed and exposed. But if you offer a lot of hiding places within a large enclosure, it completely eliminates that issue because then they have somewhere to feel safe in their environment. The issue is when you have like a big blank enclosure or a tank that they can see through on all sides, and they feel completely exposed and have nothing to go and hide into to make themselves feel more safe and secure. So that's just something to pay attention to. I feel like it's pretty obvious, and it's definitely something that is often discussed when it comes to the care of reptiles. Hides are very essential, so that's just something to pay attention to. It may also be important to possibly add more hides. They always say you should have like a warm and a cool hide for most snakes, but honestly, if you can add even more than that in different sizes, different options for them, they may pick one that you wouldn't have expected. So it's good to give them as many options as possible, and offering a lot of hiding places, even if it's not like a set hide that's a cave, but you offer a lot of foliage in a certain area of the setup, that can also function as a hide. Being creative about it and offering a lot of hiding opportunity for these animals will really reduce stress and make them feel a lot better. So if you don't give them much of that, they will not be happy in their environment. They may be a little bit more skittish with you, temperamental even, just because they just don't feel safe. Number 3 is freeze-dried bugs. So I talk about this all the time, especially if you have an insectivore. These animals hunt based on the movement. So they're like a T-Rex. They have to see the movement in order to go and eat the food. So if you have an insectivore and you're feeding the freeze-dried bugs, it's not going to be moving because it's dead. and it's not going to attract that movement, which offers enrichment to your reptiles, because hunting is like one of the main things in their life. And that is a fantastic, easy way to offer enrichment by letting them hunt those bugs. So you're taking that enrichment away and the enjoyment of the hunt. And also the freeze-dried bugs are just not as nutritious as an actual gut-loaded live insect. So when you're feeding a freeze-dried bug, it's going to lack moisture, which will more hydrate your animal, and it's also lacking those nutrients, and then it's also lacking the enrichment. So overall, they're not going to be a fan of freeze-dried bugs. Some of them may eat it just because they're hungry, but most of them, especially the insectivores that need the movement, are just not going to have any appeal to a dead bug whatsoever, and it's not going to be on their radar, and they will not eat it. Number 4 is reptile carpet. This is not something that your reptile will just show you that they absolutely hate, but they can overall. They're not going to like it because reptile carpet is something that is just, it shouldn't be in existence anymore. We should just be focusing on like proper substrates. But reptile carpet is not good for a number of reasons. The first reason is a lot of reptiles have nails like lizards, so they can get stuck in the reptile carpet and possibly rip a nail off. And then the animal is susceptible to possible infection, especially because the reptile carpets are full of bacteria and they retain that bacteria like crazy. I'm not sure how people try to clean them, but there's no way that it's going to be adequate enough. If they're going to the bathroom on the carpet or spilling things or getting food into it, like it is just a cesspool of germs and bacteria. So especially if your reptile does get injured while being on a carpet like that, it can lead to possible infection that could kill your reptile or just make it very, very sick. So overall, this is not going to be a good outcome for the reptile when you're using reptile carpet. So I'm saying that they hate reptile carpets. Another one that's very similar, which is crazy that they are still sold. I don't know how it's still happening, but it is the heat rocks. Heat rocks are something that I heard about before I even got into reptile keeping, when I was just like vaguely interested in reptiles, and people were like, don't use the heat rocks, because they used to be very, very popular before I got into the hobby. And people would use them all the time, and they basically heat up unregulated without a thermostat, and they burn reptiles, and reptiles have gotten very, very injured from it. So it's something that you should never be doing whatsoever. Just completely avoid all heat rocks. Number 6, reptiles hate overhandling or improper handling when their whole entire body isn't properly supported. So a lot of reptiles typically just want to be left alone. They don't really want anything to do with us as much as we want everything to do with them. So it's important to respect that at some level and realize that when you're keeping reptiles, you shouldn't be handling them too often. I honestly will do it like maybe 1 to 2 times a week, like depending on the animal. I'm not going to hold the animal more times throughout the week than that. And that's why it's good to have different animals, because you can go from one to the other. But like, instead of just wanting to take your ball python out every single day, they may not enjoy that. Some of them are very tolerant and they may get some enrichment out of handling, which is great, but it's not something that you want to turn into a routine and just overhandle and overhandle, because it's not something that they would prefer. Some of them actually do like to come out and will come out on their own. If that is what's happening, it's a different story. But if you're just forcing them out over and over again, it's something that you shouldn't be doing. And improper handling would basically just mean that you are not fully supporting their bodies. They need to feel completely safe when you're having a handling session with them. You want to always end it on positive terms. Even if they bite you, that's why they say you shouldn't just put the reptile back in the enclosure right away, because you ended it on bad terms and the animal may not trust you as much. So it's good to, even if they bite you, you want to keep them out a little bit longer, have them calm down. And once they're calm, then you can put them back in their enclosure. You want the experience to overall be a positive for you and that reptile, so that way fear and distrust don't build over time. Number 7 is basically fearful behaviors. So this often happens when people are new to reptile keeping and they're not very confident with what they're doing and they're kind of unsure, or even if they get a new reptile that they're just not as familiar with, they can possibly not be as confident while handling their reptile, and it shows physically when they go to handle their reptile. Reptiles are very smart, they're present, they're in the moment. They have their radar going on, they're unsure, and if you're unsure and they're unsure, it's not going to be a good handling session. So using confidence, being confident in your movements in the animal will make the animal more confident in you. And when you are not confident, people that are like reaching into an enclosure and then going back out and snapping really quick because they got scared, movements like that are going to freak out your reptile. They don't like fast movements. They don't want you just like hovering over them and being unsure and shaky. Like, they don't like that. You have to just take a breath, be confident, fully scoop up your animal, support their body. If they are not feeling fully supported, they're not going to be comfortable in that interaction, and it can cause stress. And if they're stressed out, they may retaliate to biting just because they feel like they have to defend themselves and they feel like they're in danger. So you always want to be confident and make them feel completely safe. Lack of confidence and fear in reptiles is going to make them fearful as well. So they don't like that. So it's very important to just pay attention to these things. And even if you are unsure, over time, just practicing and going slow, and even like feeding your reptile, letting it come to you more so. It's more so a thing with lizards because you can easily like make them come to you with like bugs, which is what I've been doing with Abraxas for like 2 years now. But with a snake, it's not, you can't really just like be like, here's a mouse, come to me, because they're just going to strike the mouse. But there are just different ways to become more comfortable over time. So you have to be very patient, but the reptiles will appreciate the confidence and absolutely hate people that are acting fearful around them. Number 8 is that reptiles absolutely hate when you are reaching into their enclosure above them. A lot of them have a third eye, and it is because there are a lot of predators in this world, like birds, things that are going to be above them. And so if there is like a shadow above them, they pick that up, especially like bearded dragons with their third eye. That is what they do on the top of their head. And I don't know if you guys have noticed this, I've noticed it with my bearded dragons. Well, not Stumpy. I haven't taken Stumpy outside, but I used to take Dude outside. Anytime an airplane would go by or a bird, he would freak out. Like, he was super stressed because that third eye is letting him know that there's possible danger. So if you are going above them, hovering, putting a big shadow over them, they think automatically it's danger. So you never want to do that if you are taking a reptile out. That's why I highly recommend having front opening doors. That way you can just go in from the front and scoop them out if needed, rather than going in from like a screen tank and just like going above them and snatching them out like the claw, because a lot of them absolutely hate that, and that is just instinctual. That's not something that will change, and that's just something that we need to accommodate to make them more comfortable. Number 9, reptiles may not be aware that they hate this, but they will long term, and that is the coil UVBs. Especially if you have a reptile that requires a UVB, it is so important to make sure you are using a long tube UVB. The little coil bulbs are just not sufficient whatsoever. They do not give the amount of exposure to your reptile. It just physically cannot go down deep enough into the enclosure to give them the UVB that they need. That's why it's so important to use a tube. If you do use a coil UVB on a reptile that requires UVB and it is detrimental to their health, they can get very, very sick over time, and it will not be something that is instant. It is something that will happen slowly over time, and they will get sicker and sicker. They can develop metabolic bone disease. It is very painful for them. It's a very painful, slow death, and it is just not something you ever want to see happen in the reptile hobby, as it has happened many times before, and people think, oh, well, I have the UVB, so he should be fine. And it's not the proper UVB, and it's not doing what it's supposed to. Therefore, the reptile really isn't getting the UVB, and then they get very sick. So that's why reptiles hate coil UVBs. If you have a reptile that doesn't require UVB and it's okay to just skip UVB, A coil bulb is okay, but for a reptile that really needs that UVB, like a bearded dragon or a chameleon, you really need to focus on getting the long tube UVB and get rid of the coil bulbs. Number 10 is lack of climbing opportunities. So even reptiles that are not as active, there are a lot of reptiles that you may not even expect to climb much, but once you give them climbing opportunity, you will notice that they utilize it. And it is a form of enrichment, it's a form of exercise, and every single type of reptile should have some type of climbing opportunity. If they don't have it in their enclosure, they're going to be bored, they're not going to have things to do. It is so important. And if you think about it, like, what are these reptiles doing in the wild? They're definitely going to be climbing on things. A species that I really didn't think would climb much are leopard geckos. And they really do climb, like, and they're good at it. They are very good at it, to a point where I was shocked. Kiwi actually escaped out of a tank somehow because he was climbing all over the place. And then when I upgraded him to his 4x2x16, I did a naturalistic background on the entire thing. And this gecko literally climbs all over the walls. Like, sometimes I don't know where he is, and he's all the way at the tip top of the wall that he just climbed. Like, their little nails, they are very sufficient climbers, and they will climb. So that's why it's very important to offer it to every single type of animal. Another one that you wouldn't expect it so much with is the blue-tongued skinks, because they're very chunky bodied. And it's not something that, like, that's a species I wouldn't recommend putting like a ton of like high up climbing features that are intense, more so like for a bearded dragon, because if they do fall, you don't want them to get hurt, and they are not very agile. But you can offer like lower climbing areas, which is what I tried to do with Chancho, and just like cork bark rounds and just like different things for him to go on top of. He's not at a level of like climbing as a lot of other reptiles, so it is important to keep that in mind based on the species that you're keeping. But regardless, any type of reptile should have some type of climbing feature just for their enrichment and exercise. And if they aren't going to have that, they're going to be missing out, which is why I'm putting it on my list. So those are 10 things that reptiles hate. I would love to hear any more that you guys can come up with in the comment section. Please go ahead and let me know, and I will see you guys in the next one.